dive in. Macronutrients, they are no joke. Otherwise known as macros, they are nutrients that the body uses in high amounts. The three macronutrients are carbohydrate, protein, and fat. Your body also requires micronutrients, but we won't get into that. The macronutrients provide your body with calories, energy, and the building blocks, and are the building blocks of cellular growth, immune function, and overall repair. One of the primary functions of carbohydrates is to provide your body with energy. Most of the carbs in foods that you eat are digested and broken down into glucose before entering your bloodstream. Glucose in the blood is taken up in your body cells and used to produce a fuel molecule called ATP for short, through a series of processes known as cellular respiration. I should have proofread this. It's probably not necessary.
That's all right. Keep going. It's great.
Cells can then use ATP to power a variety of metabolic tasks. Most cells in the body can produce ATP from several sources, including dietary carbs and fats. But if you're consuming a diet with a mix of these nutrients, most of the body's cells will prefer to use carbs as a primary energy source. They come in two types, simple and complex. What's the difference, you may ask? Simple carbs are like burning fuels. They break down fast into sugar in your system. You want to eat less of this type. Complex carbs are usually a better source. It takes your body longer to break them down. Fats. For years, we've been told that eating fat will add inches to your waistline, raise cholesterol, and cause a myriad of health problems. This is bullshit. But now we know that not all fat is the same. Bad fats, such as artificial trans and saturated fats, are guilty of all the unhealthy things that all fats have been blamed for. But good fats, such as unsaturated and omega-3s, have the opposite effect. In fact, healthy fats play a huge role in helping you manage moods, stay on top of your mental game, fight fatigue, and even control your weight. Adding more of these healthy fats may also make you feel more satisfied after a meal, reduce hunger, and thus promoting weight loss. Good sources of fats are monounsaturated, which are olive, canola, peanut, and sesame oil, avocados, olives, nuts, and peanut butter. And good polyunsaturated fats include sunflower, sesame, pumpkin seeds, flaxseed, walnut, fatty fish, soybean, soy milk, and tofu. Proteins are made up of building blocks called amino acids. There are about 20 different amino acids that link together in different combinations. Your body uses them to make new proteins such as muscle and bone, and other compounds such as enzymes and hormones. It can also use them as an energy source. Some amino acids can be made by your body. There are 11 of those ones. They're known as non-essential. And there are 9 amino acids that your body can't make, and they're known as essential amino acids. You need to include enough of these in your diet for your body to function. And I've got a little graph here with the macronutrient ratios for different things. So for maintenance, like just for regular dietary intake, you want to get around 30 to 50% of your calories from carbs, 25 to 30% from protein, and 25 to 30% from fat. If anyone in here is bodybuilding, which it looks like there are a few of you, you would want, you'd want 40 to 60% carbs, 25 to 30% protein, and 15 to 25% fat. So a bit more carbs. And for weight loss, you'd want to lower the carbs to about 10 to 20%, have 30 to 40% fat, and 50 to 40% protein. And on that, I will. Thank you.
That was very impressive, Jack. Thank you. And you've raised so many points in amongst that. You didn't see it, but I was trying to support you there by just throwing up a few slides while you were talking about the fats and the amino acids. So good on you. First of all, any questions? Did Jack say anything that surprised you, confused you, or that you disagree with?
There was a question I was going to ask, but I've forgotten. I think I need more visual.
Was it about fat or protein?
Yeah, I can't remember.
That's all right. Yeah, it'll come back. Don't worry.
I'll ask you.
What was that?
And can and Jack, can I get a photocopy of that later? And thank you, kind sir.
It's all right.
Pretty useful information.
You can keep the original.
Right. Any other questions? I'm going to read a couple of things out that, well, one of them particularly starts addressing the ratio that Jack was talking about, the ratio of fats, proteins, and carbs, because science has been working, particularly in the last 70 or 80 years in many Western countries, to try to tell us, or not so much tell us, but through evidence show us the correct ratios, like those ratios that Jack quoted there. That's based on years and years of research. Now, one thing, because I've been trained as a scientist, just because research says something doesn't mean that that's the definitive answer. So it's really interesting with nutrition that it's an evolving area, it's an evolving science. Our understanding is changing. And one of the reasons why our understanding is changing is that our world is changing. What we have available to us to eat is changing. Those ratios that Jack talked about, fats, proteins, and carbs, our ancestors would have been all over that, not from a research point of view, but just because they listened more to their own body. They were sensitive enough to understand and know what their own body needed, and they made adjustments accordingly, and then they passed that knowledge down to the next generation. But things today are much more complex than that. Because you've just got access to virtually nearly every food available on the planet, which is quite strange in a way. Well, that's in a Western civilization country. Of course, that doesn't apply to a lot of other countries in the world. So anyway, so it's a really interesting area that's evolving, and our understanding is evolving. And I remember speaking before I ever even got into nutrition, asking myself, well, those sort of questions that Jack was bringing up. Well, how much protein do I actually need? How much fat do I actually need? And if you've been around, and you all have since the 70s was the era, and I think that's why Jack used the word bullshit about fats. There's a lot of research went on in the 70s that really demonized fat, particularly in its relation to cholesterol and its relation to cardiovascular and heart disease. So it doesn't mean that that research is all correct, and there's a lot of evidence to say now that it isn't necessarily correct. So we're still learning. That's what I'm trying to say. Questions? Anyone want to say something? How do you figure out? Like, I'll ask you this question, Jack. So, Jack, if you presented those ratios of fat, protein, and carbohydrate, how do you live according to that, based on, say you could cook for yourself and say you could shop for yourself? How do you do that? Do you just keep a computer going in the back of your mind all the time? Oh shit, I better eat, 50% of carbohydrate and 15% of protein and the rest in fat. How would you do that?
I would think unless you were unless you're totally committed and dedicated to a certain goal like bodybuilding or something, I wouldn't think it'd be so important to consciously choose like what you're eating based on what percentages of macronutrients there are. I think like we all sort of know relatively what's a healthy diet and what's not, in a sense. So I wouldn't bother trying to calculate that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's one I'll throw at you. Say you're 80 years old and you end up in, or you want to, or you need to, you go into a retirement home. And so the situation there is that you're being fed food. You're not cooking it for yourself. And you're a man and you're 80 years old. And how do you know that you're getting enough protein? And how would you even know that when you're 80 as a man, your requirements are higher in protein than even if you're 30 and you're bodybuilding? That's true, by the way. So my question is alluding to the fact that I don't think many of us actually know, unless we're very sensitive to what our body is asking us to do. So I'm just opening that up. I'm just throwing that's just one example. And it turns out that a lot of older men in retirement homes end up drifting away from protein and just surviving on carbohydrate because it's convenient. And something happens in your body that as you start eating less protein, it's like a vicious circle. You then want to eat less protein because you can't digest it properly because your stomach isn't making enough acid to digest the protein. So in that sense, a little bit of knowledge both from the person, the man who's 80 years old. I'm saying man because for some reason the man's requirements for protein are higher than a woman when they're 80. That's what actually is going on. So a little bit of knowledge helps. To be in tune with what your body's needs are helps. But if you're on medications, if you've been doing things, like I said, if you drift off into eating sugars or too much carbohydrate and stuff, things like that, well, then you're going to need that knowledge to actually help you, because you just fade away. You just pass away ahead of your time if you don't keep that nutrition up. It's not designed to scare the crap out of you. I'm just saying that that's just one example. Questions? Anyone want to say anything? Okay, I'm going to read something out from this book. So this is called Eat Like the Animals. So this book, I just bought this recently. It's an interesting book. And by the way, I recommend for you guys and girls, while you're there at Freeman House, do some writing and reading and writing. I know you all know how to read and write, but in relation to stimulating you, finding out, inspiring you, using parts of your brain that you may not use if you don't read, because obviously we need to keep our brain growing, intact and recovering. So all of these things are good in relation to, and I'm going to be recommending you can use me as a filter. I'm not saying I know everything, but I'll recommend some good books for you to get into. Of course, not everyone's going to be interested about the same things, but this is a really interesting book. It's written by two entomologists. Anyone know what an entomologist is? Michael, take a wild stab at it, mate. What the hell is an entomologist? What?
Someone who studies entomology.
That's pretty good. It's a scientist who studies insects. So entomology is the study of insects. So these two dudes have spent 30 years or so studying insects, but they've transposed their knowledge of what insects eat and how they eat into helping us understand what and how we eat as humans. It's pretty cool, actually. It's only just been written in the last month. So I'm not gonna do any spoilers. I'm just going to read this out. So follow along. I'll give you one spoiler. There's a surprise at the end of these couple of pages that I'm going to read. So listen up if you can. Okay, so here we go. Can everyone hear me okay at the back there as well? Cool.
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Stella lived in a community on the outskirts of Cape Town, South Africa. She was one of 25 adults who between them had an impressive 40 children. It was a serene setting in the foothills of Table Mountain, surrounded by vineyards, pine plantations, groves of eucalyptus trees, stretches of natural fynbos vegetation, and a few suburban settlements. Kaylee Johnson was a young anthropologist student from New York. Her graduate thesis was on nutrition of rural populations in Uganda who lived almost entirely off natural foods. Her advisors suggested that it would be an interesting comparison to include in the study a population that ate not only natural foods, but also some sugary and fatty processed foods. This is what brought Kaylee to Cape Town, where she and Stella met. Kaylee's research approach, standard for her field, involves watching individuals throughout an entire day and recording which foods they eat and how much they eat. The foods are then analysed in a laboratory for their nutrient content to give a detailed daily record of the diet. But this study was radical in one respect. Rather than follow several subjects, each on a separate day, the team had decided to study the diet of only one individual for 30 consecutive days. Kaylee therefore came to know Stella and her eating habits intimately. What she saw was intriguing. Stella's diet was surprisingly diverse. She ate many foods, almost 90 different things over 30 days, and on each day she ate different combinations of natural and processed foods. This suggested that Stella was not particularly discerning, indiscriminately eating whatever she fancied. The numbers from the nutrient laboratory appeared to tell the same story. The ratio of fats to carbohydrates in Stella's diet varied widely, as might be expected given the variety of foods that she ate and how these differed from one day to the next. Then Kaylee noticed something unexpected. When she totaled the combined calories from carbs and fats each day and plotted that figure on a graph against the amount of protein consumed each day, there was a tight relationship. So this little story speaks directly to what Jack was talking about. So there was a tight relationship. This meant that the ratio of protein to fats and carbs, a very important measure of dietary balance, had remained absolutely consistent over the course of the entire month, regardless of what Stella had eaten. What's more, the ratio that Stella had eaten each day, 1 part protein to 5 parts fats and carbs combined, was the same combination that had been proven to be nutritionally balanced for a healthy female of Stella's size. Far from being indiscriminate, Stella was a meticulously precise eater who knew which dietary regime was best for her and how to attain it. But how did Stella track her diet so precisely? This is exactly what we were just talking about with Jack. Kaylee knew the complexities of combining many foods into a balanced diet. Even professional dietitians have to use computer programs to manage this. Could it be she might have been forgiven for wondering that Stella was secretly an expert in nutrition? except that Stella was a baboon. A confounding story when you consider all the dietary advice we humans seem to require in order to eat properly. Not that it does most of us a lot of good. So how is that
Bombshell.
possible? What was that?
Said bombshell.
Yeah, yeah, right. And that's the sort of that's the sort of thing I'm trying to help us understand. Sort of maybe come back to our default sensibilities as humans to figure out what is the right thing to eat. Okay, you okay if I go on? Okay.
Could I ask one question?
Of course.
Just like craving or sugar or like you might feel as though you need something sweet or sour or that'd be a gauge. What your body feels as though it needs, that's what you eat at the time.
Yeah. So
Can you hear me? No.
go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I probably didn't explain it very well, but
Well,
a baboon needed a certain sort of tree branch to chew on or whatever, you know, at the time.
was that a question that about the branch there at the end? I didn't quite hear that.
Not really. I'm just saying, it's rather than being an expert, is it that your body craves something, so you eat that? If you
Okay.
can get it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, so I'm going to read something else. I thought the key word there was craving. That's what I thought. Thanks, Shane. Yes, and partly yes. So yes, there is craving's a tough word, a hard word. So let me read something else out to you that addresses exactly, well, pretty closely to what you're saying. So in these pages that I'm reading out to you, it's not designed to provide wham, a definitive answer. This is how it is. I don't need to know anything else. Hart's just told us the core answer. Rather than that, though, what's happening here is that in this little discussion we're having right now, we're trying to open up our thinking to what is the most natural, normal way for us to understand what to eat, particularly for ourselves as an individual. And it's not black and white. That's what we're trying to say here. And we have to come back and relate to some of our own sensibilities, but also what's getting in the way of that. And this, what I'm about to read out right now, addresses that to some degree. So here we go. This is from that other book that I've got here. It's called The Fast 800. If you're wondering what that is, this was written by Dr. Michael Mosley, who you may have seen. He's on the ABC a fair bit. He does a fair few presentations. This is a fairly recent book he's just written. Fast means, as it says, very quick. 800 refers to 800 calories. So this is a protocol that he's brought through for people trying to lose weight in a healthy way, but also in a fast way. So it's interesting because it sort of goes against mostly what I've been working with people in my clinic, in that don't try to lose weight too fast because you might put it back on again. But I'm opening my brain into thinking a little bit differently as well. Because, and in actual fact, not only am I opening my brain, but I'm opening to myself to actually do this, because as you'll see when I come in next week, I've got a few inches around my gut that are problematic for me. So just because I'm a nutritionist doesn't make me exempt from that, what we're all susceptible to. So I'm curious and I'm interested, and I'm prepared to think about these things. So here we go. What are the most addictive foods and why? That's the little subheading here. Some people claim that sugar is addictive. What, did Zoe say something then?
Yeah,
What'd she say?
she said sugar.
Okay, well, there you go. So some people claim that sugar is addictive, but even a moment's thought will show you that that can't be true. I love, and this is him talking for himself, anecdotally, the author, Michael Mosley. I love sweet treats, but even I don't really routinely bury my face in a bowl of sugar. I recently tried eating a bowl of sugar and began to gag halfway through the first tablespoon. It is not an experience I want to repeat. So what is it that so many addictive foods have in common? That's the question he's asking. In 2015, researchers from the University of Michigan decided to find out. They got 120 students. They're always experimenting on poor students. They got 120 students, offered them a choice of 35 different foods, and asked them to fill in the Yale Food Addiction Scale, a measure of how addictive you find a particular food. The foods were then ranked from 1 to 35 by the students. Not surprisingly, top of the list of most addictive foods was chocolate, followed by ice cream, French fries, pizza, biscuits, potato chips, cake, buttered popcorn, and cheeseburgers. Somewhere in the middle were cheese, bacon, and nuts, while at the bottom was salmon, brown rice, cucumber, and broccoli. Wonder why. When you look at the list below, now you can't see this list, but I'll quickly read out the list, which is basically what we just said. This is a list of milk chocolate, 100 grams. They're all about 100 grams each, so as to standardize the foods. Milk chocolate, ice cream, French fries, pepperoni pizza, potato chips, sponge cake, buttered popcorn, and cheeseburger. So just hold that in your mind. They're the foods that were ranked as the most addictive. So when you look at this list, what strikes you? The first thing is that the highly addictive foods are also highly processed foods, designed to be absorbed very rapidly and give your brain an almost immediate dopamine, that's the reward hormone, rush. In addition, they are the sort of foods that are heavily advertised, particularly to children. But the thing that really sets them apart is what they are a mix of in regards to fats and carbohydrates. And this again goes back to Jack's talk. And not only mixture, broadly speaking, whether it is a chocolate or potato chip, cake or cheeseburger, they are all made up of roughly 1 gram of fat to 2 grams of carbohydrate. So that's just a little magic number there. All those foods that we just read out, about 10 of them, have got a ratio of 1 gram of fat to 2 grams of carbohydrate. It is a ratio that we seem to find particularly irresistible. As you can see, it's not an exact 2-to-1 ratio for all these foods, but it is pretty damn close. Why should that be? Well, one reason we find this particular ratio so appealing may be that we found it in the first food we ever consumed, breast milk. 100 ml serving of human breast milk contains around 4 grams of fat and 8 grams of carbs, making it surprisingly sweet. That's actually the lactose part. In fact, milk is one of the very few natural foods that contain high amounts of fat and carbs all mixed together. Meat is high in protein and fat, but very low in carbs, while vegetables contain lots of carbs, but not much fat. We aren't the only animal who just can't say no to this killer combination. Lab rats, this is really interesting, lab rats, given access to lots of fat alone or carbs alone, will eat just enough to maintain a steady body weight. Now, I know we're not rats, but that's an interesting thing. lab rats given access to lots of fat alone or carbs alone will eat just enough to maintain a steady, healthy body weight. But if you give them unrestricted access to foods rich in both fats and carbohydrates, they will gorge and gorge until they are almost spherical. Wild. Food manufacturers, of course, are well aware of our vulnerabilities and exploit them to sell us their products. Knowing this may not change your food compulsions, but at least it will help you understand why you go on craving food that is bad for you and may help you fight back. Ever since I told my kids some of the things that big food, he's using that inverted commas as an analogy to big pharma, have done to get us hooked, they have been less enthusiastic about going to places like McDonald's. So here we go. Do you want to know if you're addicted to a particular food? I'm sure many of you probably already know that. But so he came up with this little 10-part quiz. Try this short quiz to see how addicted you are to a particular food. By the way, if anyone is triggered or anyone is concerned during this, you're welcome to stay behind and talk to me afterwards. Try this short quiz to see how addicted you are to a particular food. More than 3 yes answers, there are 10 in total, and you may be in trouble. I try to avoid ice cream and crisps because I know that when I start, I find it hard to stop. But the only food on the addictive list that I have real problems with is chocolate. Thinking about chocolate, I said yes to questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 9, and 10, which gives me a total score of 7. There are no other food I can think of where I would score more than 2. So here's the quick little list for you, for your mind. I'll bring this book in next week, by the way, when I come in. So this is a 10-point list. You're not allowed to answer yes to. So sort of get in your mind a food that you might think you're a bit addicted to, or even partly, and then see if you answer more than 3 yeses to this. So here are the questions. When I start eating this food, I can't stop and end up eating much more than I intended. 2, I keep on eating this food even when I am no longer hungry. 3, I eat to the point where I feel physically ill. 4, I find myself craving this food when I am stressed. 5, if it isn't in the house, I will get in the car and drive to the nearest shop that sells it. Oops, that's one for me. I use this food to make myself feel better. 7, I hide this food so even those close to me don't know how much of it I eat. I used to know someone like that. 8, eating it causes anxiety and feelings of self-loathing and guilt. 9, although I no longer get much pleasure from eating it, I keep on doing so. Last one, 10, I've tried to give this food up, but have failed. Add up your yes answers. The more you give the answer yes, the more hooked on carbs you are. I will be writing more about this in the future. So that talks a little bit about, there'll be more, but just giving us something to think about. So that's addressing the question, the point that Shane brought up. Addiction can get in the way of us connecting with our own sensibilities, and even the sensibility to the point that even a baboon, I'm not putting down a baboon, don't get me wrong, but you know, even a baboon without any university training or access to Google can actually adjust its own food intake to present with the best possible ratio of fats, proteins, and carbs. Given,
So what is that? The 2
that's,
one thing.
that's for a baboon. It's not saying this ratio is for humans, Michael. They came up with that ratio, which was about 2 to 1, I believe. This meant that the ratio of protein to fats and carbs, a very important dietary measure, had remained absolutely consistent over the entire month. So they don't say exactly what that ratio is, but the point is that the ratio was perfect to maintain weight and health and muscle mass for a baboon. So the baboon was able to keep that consistent. Yes?
Oh, it's probably because it had all the nutrients around it. Like,
That's
they
right.
eat the raw foods and
That's right. That's right.
its surroundings.
That's exactly right. That's right.
Just on carb.
Which is
protein,
exactly the
just
same as us. You know, that's what we've got supermarkets for. And also health food stores and farmers markets, and we can grow our own food and all that sort of stuff. Questions? Jade, anything you want to add to that?
No, but I do have a question. I don't know if it's relevant or not. I had 3 fish oil tablets yesterday. Is that not? I know it's not good because everything in moderation. But how will that affect me having 3 in one hit?
You'll become super intelligent and start emitting light. That's what.
Out of my ass. Will I become more oily or? Yeah, not good.
Not usually as a one-off thing. Fish oils. Who gave that presentation on omega-3s? Is he there? Oh, he's not there. Yeah. So probably more what I could say about that, Jade, is just make sure they're really good quality. If you, okay, on a serious note, if you eat,
milligrams too.
What was that?
2,000 milligram ones.
Okay, 2,000 milligrams is 2 grams each. So
2 grams.
yeah, that's a chunky amount. What's the downside? Anyone like to say what's the downside of eating too much fish oil at once? There is a downside.
You get a headache.
Your burp tastes funny.
Yeah, that's one. Why did you say that, Zoe? You get a headache.
Because it's too much for your body.
Is that an anecdotal experience that you've had? An experience you've had yourself?
Nah, I'm just guessing.
Okay, all right. Guessing's good.
Cravings.
What's that, Michael?
Cravings.
Cravings.
Cravings to go and swim in the ocean.
Omega-3s are good for your brain, and you overload it, then obviously it's gonna affect in some way.
Totally. Who said that?
Yeah. Sorry.
Paul did.
Oh, Paul. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, Paul's sort of getting close to the point there, actually, because, okay, I'm going to show you this.
Doesn't it damage or overload the liver?
Yeah, it can actually do that too. So omega-3s are a polyunsaturated fat. So they're a complex, long-chain, fragile fatty acid. So we've mentioned that. Keep them cool. Don't let them get too much sunlight on them. Make sure they're not too old. All of that leads to them becoming more rancid more quickly as compared to, say, a saturated fat. Like butter is mostly saturated fat, will also become rancid. But these little babies, the omega-3s, the fish oils, will become rancid very quickly. They'll break down. They're a molecule that's quite long and can change its structure very easily. So too much of it also will overload the liver. But here's the main thing, or one of the main things I should say, is that to prevent, and this is getting a little bit technical, so we'll just get into this and maybe just leave that for today, unless I have time and read out to you about slime mold. But if you have too much of polyunsaturated fats, and particularly omega-3s, what happens is that you have to balance that with a good amount of antioxidants in your food. Who'd be so bold as to say what are antioxidants, or give us some examples of antioxidants?
Oxidized, something that hasn't been oxidized to the weather, like.
Yeah, well, antioxidants, that's right. Antioxidants prevent something from being oxidized. So what in your body I'm talking about. So what happens when you eat like fish oils, they are easily oxidized. When something goes rancid, this is a general thing, but it becomes oxidized. In other words, it's exposed to oxygen and it changes its structure. Just like iron, when it's exposed to water and oxygen, rusts. That's a change in its chemical makeup. So it's the same principle. So saturated fats aren't so easily oxidized, but these fish oils that you gobbled down yesterday, those 6 grams.
Yeah, I missed out on 2 that day, so I just took the 3.
That's fine. That's fine. So I'm just letting you know what you should do to balance that. You should be making sure that you eat food that are rich in antioxidants, like.
Or a cup of tea. Like a cup of tea, antioxidant tea.
You could get some antioxidants from tea if it's rated that way. Absolutely. There's many antioxidants, but the ones that we know most about are things like vitamin C and vitamin E. So vitamin E.
Oh, E.
Yeah, E. So like walnuts are good sources of vitamin E, and so are almonds. Green kale and spinach, great sources of vitamin E. Lemons and limes. That's why it might be nice. The Italians have got it figured out. They squeeze lemon on fish, particularly oily.
I do that.
Yeah. If you think about the way that older cultures eat their food, you can see, and this really goes back to what Jack was talking about, they're getting back to, they've learnt what their body needs when they eat a particular food. So if you gobble down 3 capsules of fish oil, Jade, your body will go, what the, it's like, there's no taste in there. There's nothing to give your body any, by the time it sort of wakes up and goes, what's going on here, it's already way down in your intestine. It's already been processed, whether it's rancid or not. You got it? So
yeah. Come out of my skin pores?
What's that?
Because will it come out of my pores and my skin like oily?
Probably not.
Oily?
Probably not just one hit like that, but if you kept doing it, yes, it probably would.
Oh, no, I won't be doing it. I had one more fish oil tablet this morning because it says 3 a day. So I'll have one at lunch and then at dinner.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to talk you out of taking the fish oil tablet. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is a very interesting discussion, and everything everyone's asking and commenting on really goes back to the whole issue that Jack was talking about. Like, how do we know what we should be eating? I think I'm going to leave reading the rest of this out to next week, because the answer is.
Damn.
What was
no
that?
Slime. No slime
okay.
mold.
I'll read the slime mold, but there's another bit later on. Okay, all right, because I've created.
Leave it till next week.
It's only a couple of pages, but Jade and whoever else is interested in this, and Jack too, the answer to your question has to do with appetite. Now, I went to university for 4 years to study nutrition medicine, and can you believe it that what is now presented in this modern research was not talked about when I studied nutrition? So it's just. And it's in many ways, what we're doing is coming back to the source. So science is like that, it's like study, dissect everything up, figure out what's going on, in a worm's eye view, and forget about the bird's eye view. And then, but eventually it comes back to first principles. And one of the first principles to be able to understand and discern what you should be eating, like Stella, the baboon, is that you have to be in touch with your appetite. And the correct word there is appetites, not appetite. It's a plural. And appetite is a bit of a misnomer. It's misunderstood. Appetite is related to hunger. So it's not just enough to be hungry, because as Shane brought up, you can be hungry for the wrong things, particularly if those addictions come in the way. But hunger implies it's just one thing that's driving you to eat food. In reality, it's a combination of multiple appetites. And it looks like, and we'll leave this till next week, it looks like they've nailed five, I call it the big five different substances, and Jack's already talked about 3 of them today, that if we're in touch with our body, our appetites will drive us to those 5 things in the correct amounts. It's pretty exciting. So I'm going to leave those other 2 as a mystery for you till next week.
I was going to say, would you like Stu and I to do a presentation on one of the last 2?
If you like. Are you okay with that, Sue?
Yeah, I like it. Yep, that's good.
Okay, so I'll tell you what one of those 2 is, and you can give a presentation on this. Calcium.
Okay, yes.
We all know about calcium pretty much. Okay, if you are all right, would you like me, you guys still okay? Would you like me to finish reading a couple of pages on the slime mold?
Yeah, I'm interested.
Yes, yes.
Everyone else all right? To hang out for another minute or 2?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going back to this book. And you thought Stella was smart. Check this out. Meanwhile, our old cousin the baboon apparently has figured it out all by its own instinct. How could this be so? So this is continuing on where we've left off before. Before we begin to explore that question, here's another tale even weirder. It starts with the lab scientist named Audrey de Chauteur at the University of Sydney. One day, Audrey took her scalpel and started preparing an experiment by cutting a gooey blob of slime mold into small pieces. Beside her on the bench sat hundreds of Petri dishes, all set out neatly in rows. Audrey picked up each fragment of yellow goo with forceps and carefully transferred it to the centre of a dish, then covered it with a lid. The dishes contained either small blocks of protein or carbohydrate, or a wheel of 11 tiny bits of jelly-like food, medium, varying in the ratio of protein to carbs. Again, this is talking to Jack's presentation. Once all the dishes had received their bit of slime mold, Audrey stacked them in a large cardboard box and left them overnight. The next day, she opened the box and laid out the dishes again on the bench. When she looked closely, she was astonished. Each bit of goo had changed overnight. When the slime molds were offered 2 blocks of food, one of protein, the other of carbs, the blobs extended their growing tendrils to both nutrients, reaching out just far enough in each direction to pull in a mix of the 2. That mixture contained precisely 2 parts protein to 1 part carb. So just addressing Michael's thing before, this is not saying that this is what we need. This is what obviously the slime mold need. But the point is, it's like, well, how does it know that? So that mixture contained precisely 2 parts protein and 1 part carb. Even more incredibly, when bits of goo were placed in dishes containing 11 different food blocks, The tendrils grew overnight from the center of the dish to colonize only the blocks containing that same 2-to-1 nutrient mixture, ignoring the rest. So obviously these slime molds don't have addiction problems, food addiction. Bizarre. So what is so special about a diet of 2 parts protein to 1 part carbs? The answer came when Audrey placed pieces of slime mold into dishes containing different combinations of protein and carbohydrate. The next day, some bits of slime mold remained stunted, whereas others had grown dramatically, extending themselves across the dish in a lacy network of pulsing yellow filaments. When Audrey later mapped the growth of the blobs, it was as if she had charted the up and down contours of a mountain. Goo placed on a nutrient that was 2 parts protein to 1 part carbs sat at the summit of the growth mountain. As the proportion of protein fell and carbs rose, or vice versa, the blob's growth decreased. In other words, when the bits of slime mold were given the chance to select their own diet, they chose precisely the mixture of nutrients needed to optimize healthy development. Extraordinary. Audrey's yellow goo, with a remarkable nutritional wisdom, is a creature with the scientific name Physarum polycephalum, literally many-headed slime. It is a real-life version of the blob of the B movie fame. It is seldom seen, but like other slime molds, including the wonderfully named dog vomit slime mold and fungi, it lives its secretive life among the leaf litter, logs and soils of the world's forest floors. It is a single-celled creature with millions of nuclei, which can regenerate itself from tiny pieces, crawl like a giant amoeba, and grow its own complex reticulated architecture of tubes that pulse and distribute nutrients around its network. It simply creates tentacles and then reaches out with them to grab whatever it wants to eat. Fascinating, if not a little horrifying. Now, you may be able to accept that Stella the baboon can make some wise nutritional decisions, but how can a single-celled creature without organs or limbs, let alone a brain or a centralized nervous system, make such sophisticated dietary choices and then carry them out? This puzzled us too, so we asked an expert. Professor John Tyler Bonner passed Steve a laboratory beaker filled with steaming coffee. Steve sat discussing Audrey's results with this venerable guru of slime mold biology in John's office, a time capsule that has not been refurbished since 1947. John explained that each part of the blob senses its local nutritional environment and responds accordingly. As a result, the entire blob acts as if it is a single sentient being seeking out optimal sources of food, a balanced diet that will ensure favorable health and rejecting what does not serve that goal. That's incredible. This, you may agree, is better than what is achieved by some other sentient beings we could name. And this, as you probably realize by now, has everything to do with what we're actually talking about and what Jack was talking about. Why have we, two entomologists, written a book about human diet, nutrition and health on a subject which quite a few experts have already weighed in on? So they go on and on about that. But there you go. The slime mold and the baboon have developed ways of rejecting what's not good for them and balancing out ratios of fats, proteins and carbs.